Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Scared Soldier back with another Borderlands 3 video. And in today's video, I'm going to be going over what I've been doing to prepare for the Guardian Takedown. Now, if you guys have not seen the Guardian Takedown, I recommend you guys go look it up on YouTube on the Borderlands channel. They posted it on their live stream or their Borderlands show, so you can go ahead and see that for yourselves. But without further ado, what I've noticed first thing was the low gravity. So our environment is very important to us, of course. So the first thing I went over to Skywell, and I also went down to the impound. I think it's called Impound Deluxe or whatever. It's on the DLC #1 anyway from the Handsome Jackpot. And I went over there and I was playing around in some low gravity. And what I was trying to look for was to see just how high I can jump from the floor to the top. I also wanted to see if my damage was scaling, if I was to run off a platform really fast and be airborne for a long time, if that would translate to speed damage on my Zane character. And also I wanted to see just what kind of heights I can achieve and how high I can actually get up in case we have to actually find some puzzles that are higher up. And what I noticed was that you can jump actually quite high. The distance off a platform to another platform is quite great, so you get a lot of good airtime. And the other thing that was really important was actually when you're on the ground. So when you're on the ground, you're not affected like I thought you would. Now, I don't play a lot of low gravity maps very often, and there's not really any too many in Borderlands. So I didn't really have a lot of experience other than just going through the story quickly. Obviously on Skywell, I don't really spend a lot of time here, but I was expecting to be a lot slower on the ground, like sprinting and just normal walking and stuff like that, but that wasn't the case at all. I felt completely normal, which is really a good sign and a good relief, because characters that depend on momentum, such as Zane, or depending on your Amara build, Amara for speed damage, I was worried about that, but no, you can run just fine, and you can also slide just fine, so that's really cool. And also, I wanted to address another thing, because we are going to be airborne. I assume that one of the anointments you're going to see an improvement on is the airborne anointment. So what you're going to want to start to look into is that anointment when the game drops out. I wouldn't look into it now because it hasn't been patched just yet, but once they drop the takedown, you will see a patch for some underperforming anointments and gear happen. So I think that the airborne is going to be one of them, because right now there's a huge gap between some of the anointments in the game. You have 300% anointments, you have anointments that give you bonus elemental damage of 100 and 150%, and then you have all the way at the bottom this while airborne get 30% damage. So how do you go from 300% to 30% damage, Gearbox? You know what I mean? So that's why a lot of people don't use it, but I think you will see a major buff to that anointment specifically, if I had to guess. But with that being said, another thing that we went ahead and did was we went against our main targets, which are going to be Guardians. So what we did was we went over to the Trial of Supremacy, and we also went over to Necrotophaea, where we saw a ton of Guardians. Now what we wanted to do was test out some of our weapons on the Guardians, because these are going to be the main enemies we are going to be going against. Now what I noticed was there was multiple types of Guardians, and this is important because each type of Guardian did a different thing. Now if you look really quickly, we're going to be going and killing the Sarahs. Those ones are going to be the enemies who are in the air, and these type of Guardians, they are always in the air. So what you don't want to do is use slow projectile weapons like Cutsmans and stuff to try to attack these enemies, because they move quite fast in the air from side to side, and if you use a slow projectile, they'll just absolutely dodge it. The other characters that were actually more aggressive were the Spectres. They would charge at you with their 2 knives in their hands and come directly at your face, sort of, and do melee attacks to you. The other ones that were actually the weakest were the Wraiths. The Wraiths were, I guess, a base tier Guardian, and they would just have a staff in their hand. They don't do too much damage and they're quite weak. They do shoot little orbs or little lasers at you with their staffs, but they're not that hard to deal with at all. The ones they got a little tankier was when they were actually possessed. When they're possessed, they also had an armor health bar for the most part. Some of them who were possessed didn't always have an armor bar, but when they did, they were a lot more tanky to deal with. But again, still doable, as you see in the gameplay, no problem at all. But again, we're not seeing all the Guardians that you would probably see in the takedown. Of course, there's going to be a lot more different types to come, but this is a cool way to test it. So again, you're going to see over here, we have the Sarahs once again, and they are in the air. And you see the one to my right, he's moving quite a bit. Some of them, they just kind of stand there. But when they're actually working, you see how quick they just move right away to the actual, to a different area really quickly in the air. So again, like you say, again, he's really dodging you quite fast. So having a slow projectile weapon is definitely not something you want to use. But for the most part, you can always expect the Sarahs at least to always be actually in the air. And they're not really that hard to deal with, honestly, in terms of damage. They're not very tanky, but they can be a pain in the butt with all their movement. Now over here is going to be a different type of guardian from the other ones you've seen. So these are the heralds, and these ones are actually quite strong. Probably the strongest that I've dealt with so far, and they are very aggressive as well with their staffs. Now they like to use their staffs in order to melee you, and they can also do some super attacks to you when they charge up, and they can do some shock damage to you. They also phase shift quite a bit and teleport very fast, so they can just disappear on you right away when you're dealing with them, and they can also shoot orbs at you like you guys see right here. Now these, out of all the characters we saw, were a little bit tankier than the other ones, but for the most part the heralds were still very easy to kill as long as you have a shock weapon or corrosive weapon to deal with their armor health bars. And then here you go again with some possessed race at the same time. So over here we're at the Trial of the Supremacy. We are at the final boss, and the final boss is actually a Sarah. So as you guys notice, all the Sarahs are in the air. So yes, indeed, this one is no exception. And right away we make the mistake of using a slow projectile weapon, and we pay for it. We absolutely miss most of our shots with it. Now the one thing I will say about the Sarahs is that after they do some of their movements, they do like to stagger and stay still for a little bit. And at that moment, you can actually use a slow projectile weapon if you want. But for the most part, I think for the takedown, you're not going to want to have slow projectile weapons very often, because you're not just going to be dealing with just one enemy. You're going to be dealing with multiple enemies, and it's going to take away when you're missing shots from the damage you can do. But right here, you can see that he staggers at times, and that's when I pulled out my slow projectile weapon. Now, keep in mind, the redistributor is not a good single target weapon. It's actually better for mobbing and things like that. And we're still doing a fair amount of damage. We wanted to test out just how much how tanky he was anyways with just a redistributor alone, to see if we can still get a good amount of damage with a not so powerful single target weapon. And we are still doing quite a bit of damage. Again, as long as you're elemental matching, which we are going to be talking about in a second, which element you want to carry on you for the takedown, you guys will be good. So just make sure you're elemental matching all the enemies, and you guys will be doing the most damage possible. And make sure you guys are keeping different elements on you. We're going to be talking about that right over here. So for the weapons, the main thing that I want to emphasize here is the elements that you're going to want to have. So there's going to be a total of 4 elements that are going to be a must-have when you're going to be going through the takedown. The reason being is because all the guardians possess at least a blue bar health bar, which is very susceptible to shock. And some of them can also have an armor health bar, which is yellow bar, over their blue bar. So what you're going to want to have is elements that can deal the most damage to those 2 bars, the yellow and the blue. So what we're going to be looking at is weapons that do that. So first of all, we're going to have the shock. The shock is going to be the strongest versus any blue bar in the game. When you tie that actually with the radiation, that's why you guys see the anointment 5150. You're going to be doing the most possible damage versus any blue bar enemy in the game, and especially at the Guardian takedown, they all have blue bars at the minimum. So again, this is going to give you the best outcome in doing so. Radiation is very effective versus the blue bar, and shock is the strongest element versus the blue bar in the game. So with the combination of those 2 elements, you guys are going to be doing the most amount of damage. Now, when it comes to the enemies that have the yellow bar, you're going to want to have cryo at the minimum, because cryo is very effective versus the yellow bar. And if you don't like swapping through weapons, I recommend also having a 5150 anointment on that cryo weapon, because that is going to allow you to do a lot of damage to the yellow bar. And then once you get down to their blue bar, you will be also doing a good amount of damage, enough to at least kill the enemies at a reasonable amount of time. So that's a pretty universal elemental combination. Now, when it comes to some of the stronger enemies, and I'm assuming some of the bigger enemies are going to have just more than a blue bar. They're also going to have a really strong armor bar, so the yellow bar. So you're going to want to have a corrosive weapon on hand, because corrosive will do the most damage possible out of all the elements against a yellow bar. And with that being said, I would actually also recommend the anointment 300%. Now the reason I recommend the 300% anointment is because just the way that anointment works is going to be perfect. The yellow bar on the guardian enemies is always actually their secondary health. So the way that 300% anointment works is that it will do that 300% bonus throughout that whole armor bar until you get down to the blue bar, which is their base health. So you can be doing maximum damage to rip down their armor, and then once you get down to their their blue bar, then you can pull out your shock with your radiation to absolutely obliterate them when it comes to the stronger enemies. That's one of my tactics that I would use. I also like to have a cryo anointment when I'm using Zane, because the combination of corrosive and cryo together is fantastic versus any yellow bar in the game. And then finally, a universal element is going to be radiation. Now, I saw some immunity phases, and most enemies and stronger enemies in the takedown or in general all have some sort of immunity phase. And what's going to happen is if they are immune to, let's say, your shock, or they are immune to radiation, it gives you the option to switch through elements in case that happens, and it will happen. So having a different element that is also effective versus the same type of health bar is going to be important. So at least having another weapon that can do damage versus the blue is going to be very, very clutch. Now for the artifact you're going to want to have, I would say, is going to be at least the cut purse. Now we don't know too much right now. I haven't played the Guardian Takedown yet, and nobody else really has, except for obviously the devs and other people part of that Borderlands 3 community. But for what I know is from playing and trying out certain things, the cut purse is going to be a must-have, because you're going to be going through a lot of ammo. There's going to be a lot of enemies, a lot of strong enemies, and if you don't have ammo, unless you're Moze, of course, any other character is going to struggle, and you might not be able to get to your ammo station fast enough, and you're going to be screwed, and you're going to be ruining your progress. So it's going to be important to have a cut purse on hand in case when you're going through your first couple runs in this takedown. Eventually we'll know more information, but you don't want to ruin your progress by not having ammo. That'll be the worst possible scenario. And then lastly, when it comes to shields, some people may have questions about using the red suit because they've seen the Guardian with that aurora of radiation around him, and the red suit would be a good bet. But what I saw in the trailer was that the characters were actually easily able to get away from that aurora that boss or mini boss was putting out. So you can just travel to the next platform really quickly. So I wouldn't sacrifice a lot of your damage right away for just a red suit. It looked like for the most part there wasn't a lot of radiation aurora going around, except when he was doing some sort of immunity phase. So I wouldn't worry too much about a red suit. Keep using some of your main shields that you guys like to use. I would say a transformer is going to be less valuable though, because a lot of the Guardians do not actually shoot bullets at you. They do a lot of melee attacks, and they're quite fast enemies. So they're a little different than some of the other characters in the game that you go against. But other than that, have a red suit in case, but I wouldn't change some of the shields you guys are using now. But with that out the way, I hope that guys helps you out a lot, and we're going to get to the next clip right here. So to summarize everything we've been doing so far, we have been going to low gravity maps to feel out just the environment and what we're going to be expecting when we are at the Guardian Takedown. We have also been going to maps such as Necrodaphea and the Trial of Supremacy to go ahead and battle some of the enemies we are going to be seeing at the Guardian Takedown. Now keep in mind, these are not just the enemies we're going to be seeing at the Guardian Takedown. There's going to be many new types of Guardians, and also new types of mini bosses, and obviously a boss that we're going to be dealing with that we cannot practice for. But what we can do is try to get the best loadout you can and find the right elements, as I showed you in the video, getting shock, corrosive, cryo, and radiation, and also making sure that you have a good complete build. Now you cannot predict everything, of course. Builds can change based off of the new patch that they will drop at the same time of the Guardian Takedown. But if there's any other news or any other thing that I can help you guys out with, I will be posting that for you guys. So definitely subscribe to the channel and like the video so you guys do not miss anything. And with that being said, it's your boy Scared Soldier signing out. Peace.